Jane is the Director of Market Intelligence at Inside Fashion. And for more than 20 years, that 20 number keeps coming up. For more than 20 years, she's provided the global fashion industry around the world with up-to-the-minute trend analysis and advice, helping them to gain clear insights into key markets and identify new opportunities. So I'm going to leave it with Jane at this point now. You've probably heard enough of me. See what she has to say. Thanks, Jane.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, to see a lot of old friends and to meet some new people, and a big thank you to CBX for organizing this. It's such a benefit for the entire industry. So as you know, because you see it here on the screen, I'm going to be talking today about what we see as 5 retail shifts that are going to transform our industry, or that in a sense already are. Okay. All right, so what do we see changing? Essentially, we really see a migration, and I think it's a healthy migration, away from chasing volume for volume's sake. I mean, we've really gone through, I hate to use 20 years again, but yes, 20 years of a tremendous amount of focus on volume. We also see a big opportunity for European mid-tier brands to enter the U.S. market, which may seem a little bit counterintuitive at the moment, but I'll talk about that a little more later. And we also see the strength of Chinese brands. We do a lot of research on Chinese brands, which are brands within the mainland Chinese market, identifying the key brands, and we have a report about China brands that talks about who are the leaders, what they're doing, their strategies. It's really interesting. So that's another area that we see as becoming important, particularly obviously because of the size of the China market. We also see that the importance of developing a brand more than just a logo and a name. And then finally, how logistics are really sort of the new best practice in terms of being able to control costs. So let's go ahead and get into it. I'm just going to take a minute for those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting before. We are a market intelligence company. We do research and analysis of the entire supply chain, focusing specifically on the fashion and fashion-related vertical. So we're going from fiber all the way through to the retail selling floor and trying to take a look at what's happening. Our information comes from primary sources, which means that we're actually going out and meeting with people. We're doing site visits. We're talking to industry experts. We're on the retail selling floor trying to see what's happening. We do one-on-one consumer research in our consumer lab. So, we're really trying to answer the question. We all know what's happening. We're trying to find out why it's happening and then identify where are those opportunities. We always talk about what's wrong, but where are the opportunities to sort of make it right and find profitability? Whoops. Oh my gosh. What happened here? Okay, so talking about chasing volume for volume's sake. This has been a model that everybody's gotten into, and it's really what's built Asia as a source, because people wanted to make more and make it cheaper. So that's been very good for the entire industry in this part of the world. But unfortunately, it's become problematic for retailers because obviously it's hurting margins. And as we can see over the past, let's say 2 years to 18 months, everyone's been reducing order sizes by about, let's say, 20 to 30% on average, based on what factories are telling us. So even if that particular customer is doing the same volume, an aggregate of the same volume throughout the year, individual order sizes are a lot smaller. And this has to do with fast fashion and being more responsive and so forth. But now we're starting to see a downsizing of retail outlets. So it's not just smaller orders, but we're seeing a consolidation of that retail footprint. And we're seeing it at luxury through to discounters. So it's really not just one sector. And we're in a sense, we see it, from our point of view, as right sizing. So I don't know what happened here. This one, this didn't. Well, there's a slide that just didn't show up. Okay. So anyway, we don't really see that this is bad news. The media puts it forward as bad news, right? There's always the headline, such and such retailer is closing 25 stores, and it's like the sky is falling and, Chicken Little should run. But, why is that bad news? If a company looks at their business and makes a strategic decision to offload things that are not performing, they might be the smartest guys in the room rather than just keeping the same thing there, maintaining, that top line, even though it's, killing the bottom line. So what we see is that this kind of right sizing, as we're calling it, is actually leading towards a healthier industry where we can hopefully get back to having better products with better margins and, sort of reduce the burden on brands and retailers. Because in a sense, trying to maintain, a huge retail footprint with tons of inventory moving all the time and collection after collection, you don't really have the time to ever do things as well as you'd like to. I mean, I feel that also in our business. There's so, you end up doing so many things that you never get to do anything as well as you'd like to, or to think it through as much as you'd like to, or to maybe develop it over a little bit longer period of time. So I think that, reducing some of this will enable brands and retailers to be their best selves. And, for many of them, it will help them get out of that sort of financial death grip. Or even if it's not a financial problem for some, it's a time problem. And it'll allow those who do this to move forward in a stronger way. So, this is something that I think is very important in what we're seeing brands that are some of the newer brands coming up or existing brands that are maintaining a healthy business are moving in this direction. It's not good, obviously, for suppliers. I mean, let's face it, suppliers, the business is built on volume, and so it's very difficult for them as this shift goes. It's harder for them to adapt to a model where, customers are looking for something that's fewer and better. I think, you can't have a conversation about retail these days without talking about online. And in a sense, it's become online obsession. As I pointed out in another seminar that some of you may have attended, and I didn't want to bring up all those slides that talk about, the figures on percent of retail and that's online and so on and so forth and be redundant. But it's really it's less than 20% in most markets. So yes, it's growing, yes, it's important, we can't ignore it, but I think, the amount of attention that's paid to this at the expense of other aspects of the business is hurting a lot of retailers. I think that, we're in a sense overlooking opportunities in our physical stores where people still do shop in physical stores, and we're focusing everything online. And again, the media plays it up to be that everybody shops online. This is where everybody's buying everything. Definitely millennials only shop online. Yet, the figures show something very different on that. And, online is not an easy business to be in either. It's a very competitive business. It has its costs and problems. Physical retail has overheads, excuse me, but so does online. Online nowadays, the demand for free shipping, the amount of returns and having to get those returns back into inventory, restocking costs, having a very large percentage of your inventory not on the selling floor or in stock, but not really sold. It's sort of in limbo because a lot of it's coming back. These are different things that have to be managed. So it's not the free ride that people make it out to be. And I think any of the customers that we've worked with, clients who we deal with, have also, sat there, they're saying, Jane, I don't understand why we're not able to do as well as, we should be. And, we're saying nobody else is doing that. Amazon is Amazon. They're sort of the Walmart of today, if you will, because, 10, 20 years ago, everybody compared themselves to what Walmart was able to do because they had scale. Amazon has a certain scale, and they play a certain role in the market, but it doesn't mean that there's no other opportunities. So, when we look at opportunities outside of online, we have to look at what Amazon isn't able to deliver, as opposed to just looking at what Amazon can do and that, we perhaps cannot do. Personalized service, an immersive experience for a brand, seeing products before they buy them. There's a lot of reasons that people go to retail. I think that, in the apparel sector, we have been, a little bit negligent, so to speak. If you look at other sectors, they're able to do this and do it pretty well. Of course, the first that comes to mind is Apple. And I think anybody who's ever passed an Apple store anywhere in the world sees that that store is always jammed with people, even though it's a product that you could easily buy online. You know what it looks like, there's no sizing or color issues, and yet people love to go into an Apple store. So, people love to go to Sephora. You can certainly buy makeup online very easily. Sephora has a very extensive online store, and yet Sephora is always jammed. And there's other stores that are similar. So in a sense, it isn't just about online. There's opportunities on and offline, and we have to think about how we can capitalize on offline and be able to engage more with our customers. And yes, have an online store as well, but not be so focused on it that we're sort of neglecting a big part of the business. It's finding that synergy between online and offline, as opposed to just saying we have to be online at any cost. European mid-tier brands. I think it's really interesting when you look at the European mid-tier brands. There's a lot of very strong brands in terms of the design and quality of these brands. And because the European market is more diversified, brands tend to have more of a personality that reflects their home country, so to speak. When you look on the other side of the pond at the U.S., you look at a country that's one country, but it's very diversified in terms of the consumer, what you might say, can't think of the right word, the way people look, okay, for lack of a better way to put it. You have people who are very tall and big boned. You have people who are petite. You have people with darker skin or lighter skin, curvy, more slim. So we need to find ways to provide apparel that people will like and want to buy. I think when you're selling to the teen market, which people have been focused on, the junior market, fit is people are a little more, more worried about what's trendy and overlook fit a little bit more. But when you're looking at the rest of the population, fit, quality, etc., becomes a bigger criteria. And I think that, when we look at what's happened, we've seen the demise of what used to be called bridge or better brands over the years that catered more to this more mature market, that offered a little bit more on fit and so forth. We've sort of seen the market polarized between fast fashion on one end and then very high-end luxury on the other end. And there's really nothing in the middle, and people say, well, there's no opportunities in the middle. And I think that was true for many, many years, but I think that's starting to shift. And from what we can see, there is a very big underserved market. And I'm hearing this not just from women, but also from men, interestingly, who say, I just can't find anything that I like. So, I think that we're moving away from a consumer or an entire consumer base that has only been driven by price. We are looking now and seeing people will pay a bit more if they think they're getting something better. And that's a big if. They have to feel, gee, this is better. I like this fabric. I put this on. I like the way it looks on me. Gee, this is something special. But when you look at the size of that market, we're looking at about almost 40% of the U.S. market falls between ages 35 to 65, which is a pretty big figure. And we're looking at an opportunity for more career-oriented type of wear, not something that's it has to have style, in other words. It looks professional, but it has style. It fits nicely. And there's a huge void that nobody's really filling at the moment. We've moved away from an older customer wanting to wear something that's a little bit, too young, more of a junior kind of a collection being worn by someone who was a little bit older. And yet people don't want to wear something that's sort of frumpy. And there's nothing that's serving that market. So, if you look at the European mid-tier brands, we are seeing products that suit that. And we're starting to see those brands come into the market. And we're starting to see them expand. Brands like Reiss or Ted Baker or L.K. Bennett or Maj, and many, many others that I haven't mentioned. So, if you look at those collections, they're more focused. They're targeting a specific customer, particularly because their home markets are different. So you will be able to bring that in and match that up with a customer in the U.S. who has that, what you might call style or figure profile. There's a more consistency in brand signature, again, because not trying to please such a diversified market that we end up, sort of washing out any kind of personality so that we can make it fit many, many different people. There's a much stronger quality and style aspect. It appeals more to a fewer and better mindset. So we're seeing mid-tier consumers who are looking for brands who want to buy them more as an investment piece. So, the concept that everything is fast fashion and people want to buy it and throw it is not really accurate for the entire market. Increasingly, people would be happier to buy something that they say, gee, this is really nice. I'll pay a little bit more for this. I think I can, wear it, for a couple of seasons. It looks nice. And yet, it's hard to find that. Moving to another part of the world, let's take a look at China. China is also really interesting. Massive market, increasingly wealthy for most consumers, stable employment. Yes, of course, the media talks about a lot of ups and downs in the economy, but it's more a very small segment that are doing a lot of the property investment and so forth. If you look at most of the Chinese population, the employment level is quite stable. People feel quite confident that they have a job today, they'll have a job tomorrow, incomes will be stable and rising. So it's become a very important consumer market. And within that market, you have a massive number of brands. I mean, it's just crazy how many brands. In part, if you want to start a brand in China, you're sort of lucky because you have production right in your backyard. So there's a lot of brands. But there are a few that have come up as being really strong players and really standouts. And as we look at those brands and we sort of analyze what they're doing, it's really interesting because they have no legacy practices. They're just starting from scratch, and they're very closely connecting with their consumer market. They understand what these people want. They're very much doing programs that are in touch with their consumer base. And so they're able to give that customer something that has the right blend of the style that they want and yet modified for the tastes of the market. So, initially what happened is anyone who was making money in China wanted foreign brands, right? It was prestigious. It meant that, you had a certain amount of status. But we're seeing that shift, and we're seeing that buying a foreign brand because it's a foreign brand is becoming less and less of a priority. And people are starting to be very comfortable wearing domestic brands and feeling, very, very happy with those. Not saying, well, gee, I'm only going to buy this because I can't afford or I don't have access to a foreign brand. So we think that, it's interesting to see how China's evolving and becoming its own, sort of self-serving market in that respect. So yes, there's an opportunity for foreign brands going into China. But, as we see it going forward, it won't be just dropping in, this is what we have and here it is. It's going to have to be a lot more localized. It's going to have to be something that understands what this consumer wants from the point of view, of course, of fit, but also of color and details, and how people there like to shop and what they, what matters to them. So being foreign will no longer be enough to compete in China. And I think watching these brands and what we've learned by analyzing a lot of them has really been very interesting. It's they're doing stuff that we would have never thought of. Will Chinese brands expand into foreign markets? Right? We talk about now we're seeing so much brand expansion across borders. I don't really think so for the moment. I think that when you have a big enough home market, and it's a lot easier to be big in your home market, there'll be less impetus. There will be some. I think we'll see a situation that's more like what we've seen with U.S. brands, which remained really focused on the domestic market, which was quite big, and had less incentive to go internationally, whereas the European brands, of course, have expanded very much internationally, as we see being here in Hong Kong. You can see many European brands from fast fashion, mid-tier, luxury here, and yet you don't really see much of U.S. brands. So I think China is going to follow more along that direction of how the U.S. brands manage. And I think it's also, again, making a product that suits that market. And very few Asian brands have been successful, I say Asian brands, I mean apparel brands, in penetrating Western markets. I mean, you can see even Uniqlo took them years and years and years to be able to be successful in Europe and in the U.S. They went in, it didn't work, they went out, they came back in with a new way, and now they're doing well. But it wasn't easy for them, even with all their experience. So I'm not expecting to see a vast amount of Chinese brands trying to sell into Western markets. But we do see a lot of turf wars coming up. In the U.S., I think, as I touched upon before, the expansion of EU brands into the mid-tier and fast fashion markets in the U.S., it's happening, and we expect it to continue to grow. And also we're seeing online brands in the U.S. now moving into offline physical retail. So there'll be a lot of competition. In China, of course, we talked about, there's a vast number of domestic brands. Barriers to entry if you are a domestic brand in China. It's easy because, as we said, you have production there. So there's an awful lot of competition. And then in Europe, of course, EU brands are now trying to expand cross-border within the EU. So, certainly on, the retail selling floor, there's a lot of competition, and you have to be really, really good in that kind of an environment. I think that, it's no longer enough to just say, well, we have a big name and we've always, been doing this. It's becoming more and more down to the nitty-gritty of product. And do people really like that product? It's not enough, to the next point, of having just a name. Before, just a name would sell. People preferred to buy a brand name. It gave them confidence that what they were buying had the right style. They felt it was, there was more of a guarantee of quality. There was someone backing it up. And a lot of that's changed. So, some of that has come from online brands, because those were brands that people didn't know and couldn't even touch or feel. And yet consumers started to become comfortable buying something online from a brand that they hadn't experienced elsewhere and didn't know of. And that sort of broke down a barrier. So you have a consumer who's willing to try new things, who's willing to look at something and say, I never heard of this brand, but gee, I like the quality, it looks nice, I put it on, it fits, I really find that suits me, and they'll go for it. So, whether you're an established brand or whether we're a new brand, we have to think about how are we developing our product in a way that consumers really want. And I think that really relates back to shifting from this volume-driven model to a model where we're getting really close to what that customer wants. The model that's sort of, brand names at a discount, right? Big promotions in store, online, it's always brands, and it's 25% over, 40% off, or, buy one, get one kind of thing. It's not moving consumers the way it used to. To a great extent, you have consumers in just about every market who have more stuff than they know what to do with. Most people will say, I have too much, I want to get rid of a lot of this stuff. So, there's not that need to stock up. So when someone buys, they're buying it because they like it. They're buying it because there's something about it that they really want. So, that's a shift that we want to think about in terms of, how we're managing our business. In fact, in many cases, the product that's not marked down actually looks better these days, because we're looking at a sea of markdowns in every store all year long. So when you go to a store and everything's not on sale and you have something unique, it looks attractive. And again, people say, is it possible, to sort of not sell on discount? It's a big challenge for the apparel industry, but yet we see other industries doing it. And the one that comes to mind first is Sephora, because you really don't see discounts in Sephora, and you don't even see gift with purchase, which you have in department stores. I mean, I think, anyone who's purchased cosmetics knows when you go to a department store, there's always going to be, at some point or another, a promotion for one brand or another. If you buy, $50 of this, you'll get this little gift bag and things, and there's always something, right, that motivates you to buy or to buy a little bit more. And yet Sephora doesn't do that, and they put a serious dent into the department store business. So, these are just some things that, we might want to consider when we look at our business. So finally, talking about logistics. And again, this is a little bit of a shift, but it's really, it's difficult nowadays to try to chase cheap labor or lower materials. We're running out of places where labor is cheap, and, as we were talking about earlier, consumers want quality. So continually looking to find cheaper materials or in some way cut costs on materials is not going to be a winning strategy for most brands and retailers. So the other way to do it, or the newest way that we're seeing some of the better brands managing, and that is through tighter logistics, managing the supply chain as tightly as possible, looking for every opportunity to cut wastage somewhere along that entire chain. So, in a sense, it's time equals money. And anytime we can speed things up, that's going to be the way that a lot of the more savvy companies are controlling costs. And when we meet with these companies, we talk about what they're doing, this is what they're saying. They're saying that it's not that cost doesn't matter. Of course, production cost matters. It does. But they're saying that nowadays, they're really looking more at ways to get things faster, that speed is becoming more of a priority. Maximum transparency throughout the entire supply chain is going to be the gold standard. So an agile supply chain that's powered by a lot of new logistics solutions is going to be the winning strategy. And I've had the opportunity to participate in 2 logistics conferences in the course of this year, and there's a lot of interesting new solutions that are coming out that are supporting companies in being able to do this. So, that's what we're seeing as, on the production side of things, what's really starting to change. So if we look at retail outlook for 2018 and beyond, we're seeing a right sizing of physical stores and managing inventory as tightly as possible. The focus is going to shift from growing the top line or growing sales to really improving the bottom line. Also saying no to markets where our brand isn't a good fit, and that's another discipline that's very difficult, because we all want to be in every market, and yet a lot of markets we're never going to be a hero in those markets. So we have to have sort of the backbone to say, this isn't for us, this isn't our market, we're just going to let somebody else have that. Let's focus on where we can be a hero. For all brands, it's going to be essential to define a very solid identity and signature so that a consumer really understands who you are and what you stand for. And the focus is going to really be on appealing to niche markets as opposed to trying to be everything to everybody. Even fast fashion is going to have to increase the quality component because increasingly consumers are very quality aware. And by quality, we're talking about durability and fit primarily. So that wraps it up. I think I just came in under the time thing because I'm getting the sign that tells me wrap it up. Anyway, I thank you all for your attention. Okay, I got the sign over there. Anyway, if you'd like a copy of this presentation, please feel free to email me. If you have questions or if there's anything you need or if I can help you in any way, I'd love to hear from you. And again, thank you so much for your time.
Actually, the program you guys did was awesome.